Snow fell heavy over the frozen valley, coating the ground with a white shroud that muffled sound and concealed footprints. Caravans crossed the main road before the storm worsened, and among the travelers was a young Omega dressed in simple servant's clothing, leading a small cart laden with provisions. She kept her head low, her hood covering part of her face. Alone. Vulnerable. Exactly the kind of target predators searched for. 5 warriors emerged from the white fog of the blizzard, laughing as they blocked the path. They were soldiers from a rival pack, known for pillaging travelers during winter, when no one wanted to involve themselves in conflicts under such cruel cold. One Omega alone in the snow? How fortunate for us. They surrounded the cart. One grabbed the reins, another yanked her hood back. She did not beg, did not cry, did not run. She only breathed. 13 seconds. That was how long it took for the first warrior to fall. What appeared as fragility revealed itself as calculation. She slid across the snow with precision, using the terrain itself to her advantage. A decisive strike behind the knee, a swift movement to the wrist, a strategic spin that made another man lose his balance on the ice. The third tried to grab her and ended face down in the snow. The wind howled. In less than half a minute, all 5 lay fallen, struggling to breathe under the cold and humiliation. That was when they realized. She was not merely an Omega. She was Mirelle Trudna. A trained Luna, raised to command, a strategist by nature, heir to a pack destroyed years before by betrayal. Since then, she had lived hidden, passing as a servant to survive while waiting for the right moment to reclaim her place. But someone was watching everything from atop the snow-covered hill. Not just any Alpha, it was Alpha King Xandrek Galfrost, widowed for 3 winters. He had lost his Luna, Amera, to an illness no cure could stop. Since then, he ruled with firmness, but with a closed heart. No candidate sparked his interest. No presence made his heart react beyond duty. Until that moment. From atop the hill, Xandrek saw every movement Mirelle made. Not just the skill, but the restraint. She could have killed, but chose only to neutralize. He saw discipline. He saw honor. He saw loneliness. And he recognized it, because he carried the same. When he descended the hill, the wind nearly erasing his footprints, Mirelle was already replacing her hood, ready to continue her journey as if nothing had happened. She felt his presence before seeing him. When their eyes met, the world seemed silent despite the storm. Xandrek did not speak as a king. He spoke as a man. You fight like someone who has lost everything. Mirelle held his gaze. And you watch like someone who has also lost. The truth hung between them, mixed with the frozen air. He offered escort to the next village, not as a command but as a choice. She accepted. Not because she needed protection, but because for the first time in years, someone saw her beyond the servant's mask. Before we continue with the story, I want to thank everyone who supports the channel and loves our Alpha King romances. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, please consider clicking the link in the pinned comment to check out our Patreon and become a member. As a member, you'll get access to exclusive content you won't find here on YouTube. Extended stories, special scenes, early access to new episodes, and complete romance arcs created just for our supporters. As a bonus, you'll also unlock exclusive vampire romance stories, diving into darker, more intense love stories filled with desire, danger, and passion. By joining, you're directly supporting the channel and helping us bring even more immersive stories to life. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and how old you are. I hope you enjoy the story. During the journey through the snow, they spoke little, but each shared silence brought them closer than words could. Xandrek spoke of Amera with respect and longing, not as a shadow that imprisoned him, but as part of the history that shaped him. Mirelle listened without insecurity. She felt no competition. She felt admiration for the love he still honored. In the following days, Xandrek invited Mirelle to the castle, under the pretext of investigating the defeated warriors. But the truth was simpler. He wanted to know her. He wanted to understand why her presence warmed a heart he believed frozen forever. The castle stood like a fortress carved from the mountain itself, its stone walls darkened by centuries of winter storms. Inside, fires burned in every hearth, yet the warmth felt superficial. The halls echoed with emptiness despite the servants moving efficiently through corridors hung with tapestries depicting ancient battles and forgotten victories. Morel walked those halls with measured steps, acutely aware of every gaze that followed her. Whispers trailed in her wake. The mysterious woman the king himself had brought. The Omega who fought like a warrior. The servant who moved with the bearing of nobility. She ignored them all. But ignoring did not mean unaffected. Each whisper was a reminder of how precarious her position was. She had no official status here. She was neither guest nor prisoner, neither servant nor advisor. She existed in a liminal space, and uncertainty gnawed at her despite her outward calm. A young Omega servant approached her hesitantly in one of the corridors, eyes downcast in the submissive posture Morel recognized all too well. She had worn that same posture for years, a protective camouflage against those who would prey on perceived weakness. "My lady," the girl stammered, "the head steward wishes to know if you require anything. New clothing, perhaps. Or would you prefer quarters in the eastern wing where it is quieter?" Morel studied the girl with gentle attention, noting the way she trembled slightly, the fading bruise barely visible beneath her sleeve. "What is your name?" Morel asked softly. The girl looked up in surprise. "Ilara, my lady. Ilara. A beautiful name. Tell me, Ilara, who gave you that bruise?" The girl's eyes widened in panic. "I fell, my lady. I am clumsy." Morel crouched down to the girl's level, ignoring propriety. She spoke quietly so only Ilara could hear. "I spent years pretending my bruises came from clumsiness, too. You do not need to lie to me. And if someone is hurting you, I want to know." Ilara's eyes filled with tears, but before she could respond, a harsh voice cut through the corridor. "You there. Stop bothering our guest with your incompetence." A senior male servant approached, his expression cold and disdainful. Morel recognized the type instantly. Someone who wielded what little power they had, like a weapon against those who could not fight back. She stood slowly, and something in her bearing made the man hesitate. This young woman was not bothering me. She was performing her duties with grace. If I hear you speak to her with such disrespect again, we will have words. Do you understand? The man's face reddened. "You have no authority here. You are merely a guest." "Am I? Then perhaps I should ask King Xandrek whether guests in his castle are meant to witness servants being abused." The threat landed. The man knew as well as she did that Xandrek had brought her here personally, that his attention to her was uncommon. He bowed stiffly and retreated, but his eyes promised retribution against Ilara later. Morel made a mental note. This was not over. She turned back to Ilara, whose expression showed a mixture of gratitude and terror. "Come to me if he retaliates. Or better yet, tell me where to find him after dark when fewer witnesses are present." A small smile flickered across Ilara's face before fear smothered it. "Thank you, my lady, for seeing me." "Always," Morel replied. "We who have been invisible know the value of being seen." She ignored them all. In the Great Hall, Xandrek sat reviewing reports from his advisors, but his attention kept drifting to the windows overlooking the courtyard where Morel stood alone, watching snow begin to fall again. Even from this distance, he could see the way she held herself. Not defeated, not hiding, simply waiting. For what? He did not yet know. But he found himself wanting to know everything about her, the way she tilted her head when deep in thought, the barely perceptible way her shoulders relaxed when she believed no one was watching, the shadow that crossed her face when she thought she was alone. He had not felt this pull toward another person since Amira. The realization brought both guilt and relief. Guilt because part of him still felt like acknowledging attraction to another woman was a betrayal of everything he and Amira had built together. Relief because feeling anything beyond duty, after 3 years of emotional numbness, meant he was still capable of living, not just existing. His beta, Corvain, a scarred veteran with gray threading through his beard, cleared his throat deliberately. When Zandrek did not respond, he cleared it again, louder. Zandrek finally pulled his gaze from the window. "Forgive me. You were saying?" Corvain's weathered face showed something between concern and knowing amusement. "I was saying that the northern border requires your attention. The raids are increasing. But you have not heard a word of the last 10 minutes. Zandrek had the grace to look chagrined. "My mind is elsewhere." "Yes. In the courtyard, if I am not mistaken." Corvain paused, choosing his words carefully. "She is not Amira." Zandrek's jaw tightened, defensive instinct rising. "I know that. Do you?" "Because I have watched you since the late queen passed. You have rejected every possible match, turned away from every woman who showed interest, not because they were unworthy, but because you believed allowing anyone close was dishonoring Amira's memory." Corvain stepped closer, his voice gentler. "But my king, my friend, Amira would not want you to stop living. She loved you too much for that." Zandrek closed his eyes, old grief rising like a tide. "When she died, I held her hand and promised I would always love her. How do I reconcile that promise with what I am beginning to feel? You love her still. You always will. But love is not a finite resource that depletes when shared. It multiplies. You can honor what you had with Amira, and still open your heart to what you might have with Mirelle. They are not mutually exclusive." Zandrek opened his eyes, looking back toward the courtyard. Mirelle had moved, now pacing along the wall, her white hair catching snowflakes like stars. "She fights well for a servant," Corvain observed. Zandrek's voice was quiet, but certain. "She is not merely a servant. I do not yet know what she is running from or what she has survived. But I recognize the look in her eyes. It is the same one I see in my mirror. The look of someone who has lost everything and found the strength to keep standing anyway." "No," Corvain agreed quietly. "I do not believe she is." That evening, Zandrek found Mirelle in the castle library, a room few visited anymore. She stood before a shelf of old chronicles, her fingers tracing the spines of books thick with dust. She did not turn when he entered, though he knew she sensed him. The library had been Amira's favorite room. She would spend hours here, reading by firelight, her laughter echoing when she found something particularly absurd in the ancient texts. Zandrek had avoided this space since her death, unable to face the memories contained within these walls. Yet here he was, drawn by the presence of a woman who somehow made the room feel less like a mausoleum and more like a space waiting to live again. "You read," he observed, his voice softer than intended. "I was taught to," she replied simply, "before everything fell apart." She pulled a volume from the shelf, examining the cover with careful fingers. Her touch was reverent, the way someone handles something precious and rare. "My father believed that a leader who could not read was a tyrant waiting to happen. He said that strength without wisdom was just violence with a crown." She smiled faintly, sadly. "He had me study everything: history, strategy, philosophy, even poetry. My tutors despaired because I asked too many questions, challenged too many assumptions." Zandrek moved closer, close enough now to catch the faint scent of winter pine that clung to her hair, mixed with something uniquely her. "Your father sounds like he was a wise man." He was, until trusting the wrong person cost him everything. He moved closer, close enough to catch the faint scent of winter pine that clung to her hair. Tell me about your pack." Morel's hand stilled on the books. "Why?" "Because I want to know who you were before you became who you are. Because you move like someone carrying the weight of an entire world, and I want to understand why. Because since the moment I saw you fight, I have not been able to stop thinking about you." The last admission hung in the air between them, more vulnerable than either expected. She turned then, and in the firelight her white hair seemed almost ethereal, framing a face marked by both youth and ancient sadness. Her green eyes, he noticed, held flecks of gold that caught the light when she was emotional. My father was alpha of the Moonvale Pack. We lived in the eastern mountains, where the forest grows so thick, sunlight barely touches the ground even at midday. Everything was shadow and silver, mystery and magic. It was beautiful. It was home. Her voice remained steady, but Zandrek heard the tremor beneath, the way breath caught slightly on certain words. Our territory was not the largest or the richest, but it was prosperous. My father led with fairness, my mother with compassion. They were beloved, and I was their only child, their heir, trained from childhood to one day take my father's place. She moved to the window, looking out at the darkness beyond. I remember the night it happened so clearly, the winter solstice celebration, the great hall decorated with evergreen boughs and silver ribbons, musicians playing while everyone danced and laughed. I wore a dress my mother had commissioned, deep blue like midnight, with stars embroidered across the bodice. I felt beautiful. I felt safe. Her reflection in the window showed tears beginning to track down her cheeks. The ceremonial wine was passed. My father drank first, as tradition demanded. Then my mother. Then the elders. Within minutes, people began to fall. The music stopped. The laughter turned to screaming. I watched my father collapse, clawing at his throat, unable to breathe. I watched my mother crawl toward him, dying before she could reach his side. Zandrek wanted to comfort her, but sensed she needed to finish, needed him to understand the full weight of what she carried. Valdrin, my father's beta, revealed himself as the architect of it all. He had been planning the takeover for years, turning key members of the pack to his cause with promises of power and wealth. He had been patient, waiting for the perfect moment when guards would be relaxed and trust would be absolute. She wiped her tears roughly, as if angry at herself for showing weakness. My nursemaid, Grandmother Farah, she was old and wise and suspicious by nature. When the poisoning began, she grabbed me and dragged me to the cellars despite my screaming, despite my begging to stay with my parents. She locked me in a hidden chamber my father had built for emergencies, a place only family knew existed. Morel turned from the window, meeting Zandrek's gaze directly. I listened to my world burn above me for 3 days. I heard the screams. I heard Valdrin's victory speeches. I heard loyalists being hunted down and executed. And I could do nothing but survive. Grandmother Farah came when it was finally safe, brought me food and water, helped me escape through underground tunnels that led into the mountains. She took a shuddering breath. She told me to run, to hide, to survive until I was strong enough to reclaim what was stolen. She gave me the last of her money, kissed my forehead, and turned back toward the ruins. She died defending my escape route when Valdrin's soldiers discovered it. She bought me time with her life. Her voice remained steady, but Zandrek heard the tremor beneath. He was a traitor by his own beta. During a gathering meant to celebrate the winter solstice, poison was slipped into the ceremonial wine. My father died first. My mother tried to protect me, but she fell too. I survived only because my nursemaid hid me in the cellars. When I emerged 3 days later, everything was ash. Zandrek felt the familiar weight of loss settle heavier in his chest. He understood her pain in ways few could. Loss was not just an event, but a constant companion. A shadow that walked beside you through every sunrise that came after. How old were you? 16 winters. The same age Amira had been when we met. He thought, but did not say. 16, still practically a child, yet forced to become a survivor overnight. And the traitor? Morel's green eyes hardened like ice forming over still water. He took control of the pack. Declared me dead. Sold the story that the poisoning was an attack by a rival pack, that he had barely survived himself, that he fought valiantly but could not save the Alpha's family. The pack, traumatized and leaderless, accepted him. Those who suspected the truth either died or fled. Within a month, he had consolidated power completely. She paused, vulnerability flickering across her features like candlelight. I have lived under false names ever since, moving from village to village, working as whatever would keep me fed and forgotten. I learned to fight from wandering warriors who saw potential in an orphan with nothing left to lose. I learned strategy from old texts in abandoned libraries, studying the tactics of leaders long dead. I learned survival from every cold night I endured alone, every close call with Valdrin's hunters, every moment I chose to keep living when dying seemed easier. She paused, vulnerability flickering across her features. Until today, I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Not as a servant, or an omega, or a fugitive, but as myself. As someone who might be worth knowing beyond what I can do, or what I represent. Xandrek stepped closer, close enough now that she had to tilt her head to maintain eye contact. He wanted to touch her, to offer comfort, but held himself back, unsure if the gesture would be welcome. You are seen now, not as a servant, not as a victim, as what you truly are. And what is that? A Luna without a pack, a warrior without a war, a woman who has survived when she should have fallen. His voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. Someone who understands what it means to lose everything and still choose to keep living. Someone who carries scars with dignity. Someone who made me feel something beyond duty, for the first time in 3 years. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Morel searched his face, and for the first time since her world had burned, she felt something other than numbness or rage. She felt recognition, connection, the terrifying possibility of trust, the even more terrifying possibility of hope. Your mate, she said carefully, needing to acknowledge the elephant in the room. Amira, you loved her deeply. It was not a question but a statement, a way of giving him space to speak or not speak as he chose. Xandrek did not look away, and she respected him for it. Another man might have avoided the subject, pretended his past was sealed away in a box that never needed opening. But he met her gaze steadily. Yes, she was my heart's companion. We met when we were both young, both still learning who we were meant to become. She laughed like spring rain and fought like wildfire. She could make the entire court laugh with a single observation, then turn around and negotiate treaties that would have stymied our best advisors. His expression softened with memory, and Morel felt no jealousy, only respect for the love he still carried. When she fell ill, I exhausted every resource, sought every healer across every territory, bargained with every god I could name. I would have given my own life if it would have saved hers. But sometimes there is no exchange to make. Sometimes death comes regardless of how hard we fight, how much we love, how desperately we bargain. He drew a slow breath, and Morel heard the echo of old agony in it. I held her hand as she faded, and when she died, I thought that part of me died too. For months I could barely function beyond the mechanical requirements of ruling. Corvain and my other advisors handled most decisions while I existed in a fog of grief. Eventually, I emerged from it, not healed, but functional. I thought that was enough. I thought duty was enough. He reached out then, his hand hovering near her cheek but not quite touching, asking permission without words. When she did not pull away, he cupped her face gently. But grief, I have learned, is love that has nowhere to go. It does not mean the heart cannot beat again. It means we carry what we loved into whatever comes next. Amira and I had plans, dreams of the future we would build together. Those dreams died with her. But that does not mean I cannot dream new dreams. It does not mean I cannot love again. Differently, perhaps, but no less deeply. Morel felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall, though one escaped anyway, tracking down her cheek to where his thumb caught it. "I am not her," she whispered. "I cannot be what you lost. I do not laugh like spring rain. I have forgotten how to laugh at all most days. I am broken in ways that may never fully heal." "No," Zandrek agreed gently. "You are not her. And I am not asking you to be. You laugh like winter wind when you let yourself, sharp and clear and honest. You are not broken. You are scarred. There is a profound difference. And I am asking only if you will let me know who you are, scars and all. If you will let me see you as you are, not as who you think you should be." His other hand came up, so he was cradling her face between both palms, his touch remarkably gentle for hands that could kill with ease. "I am asking if you might let me try to be someone you could trust. Not today, perhaps not even this year, but eventually, if we give this, whatever this is, a chance to become something." Before Morel could respond, the sound of shattering glass tore through the quiet. Shouting erupted from the courtyard below. Zandrek moved instantly, his entire demeanor shifting from tender to lethal in a heartbeat. Morel followed without hesitation. In the courtyard, the 5 warriors from the road had returned, but not alone. Behind them stood at least 20 armed soldiers bearing the crest of the Blackthorn Pack, the same clan that had destroyed her family. And leading them was a man Morel recognized instantly, even after all these years. Valdrin Kresh, her father's betrayer. The man who had murdered her family and stolen her birthright. He stood tall and cruel, his scarred face twisted in a smile that never reached his dead eyes. When he saw Morel, that smile widened. "Little Morel. I should have known. You always were harder to kill than you should have been." Zandrek stepped in front of her, his voice dropping to a growl that made the very air vibrate with power. "You trespass in my territory. Speak quickly before I remove your tongue." Valdrin laughed, a sound like breaking bones. "I came for what belongs to me. The girl is a fugitive from my pack. By law, she must be returned. She belongs to no one," Zandrek said coldly, least of all a murderer who stole his position through poison. Valdrin's expression darkened. "Careful, King. My pack outnumbers yours at this border. I could tear down this castle stone by stone if I wished." "You could try," Zandrek replied, with lethal calm, "but you will die long before the first stone falls." The tension coiled tight as a drawn bow. Morel felt her heart hammering, but not with fear, with fury, with years of suppressed rage finally finding focus. She stepped from behind Zandrek, ignoring his protective instinct to pull her back. "You want me, Valdrin? Then face me. Not as a murderer in the night, not as a coward who poisons wine. Face me as what I am, the rightful alpha heir of the Moonvale Pack." Gasps rippled through both sides. Valdrin's face twisted. "You are nothing. You are Omega. You have no claim." Morel pulled back her hood completely, letting her white hair fall free. She straightened to her full height, and something shifted in the air around her. An authority that had always been there, buried under survival and fear, but never truly gone. "I am Morel Trudna, daughter of Alpha Gareth and Luna Silvera. I am the last of the Moonvale bloodline. And I challenge you, Valdrin Kresh, for what you stole. The old laws were absolute. A challenge issued by rightful blood could not be refused without dishonor." Valdrin's eyes blazed with hatred, but he nodded slowly. "Very well. At dawn. 1-on-1. When I kill you, there will be no one left to dispute my claim." "When I kill you," Morel corrected quietly. There will finally be justice for those you murdered." Valdrin and his soldiers withdrew to camp outside the castle walls. The courtyard emptied slowly, whispers spreading like wildfire. Zandrek waited until they were alone before turning to Morel, and she saw something in his expression she had never expected. Not anger, respect, but also fear. Not for himself, but for her. "You should have told me," he said quietly. "Would it have changed anything?" "Everything." He stepped closer, his hands hovering near her shoulders but not quite touching. "You cannot fight him alone." "I must. It is the only way to end this with honor." "Honor," Zandrek repeated, and his voice cracked slightly. "I am tired of honor that costs me everyone I love." The admission hung between them, raw and unguarded. Morel reached up, her hand cupping his bearded jaw. "Then, help me prepare. Train with me tonight. Be with me in this. Not as a king protecting a subject, but as an equal standing beside an equal." Zandrek closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "I have only just found you. I cannot bear to lose you already." "Then help me win," she whispered. They trained through the night in the castle's underground sparring chamber, a space carved from living rock and lit by torches that cast dancing shadows across the walls. The air smelled of stone and sweat and determination. Each breath echoed slightly, giving the space an otherworldly quality, as if they existed outside of time itself. Zandrek did not hold back, attacking with the full force of his strength and skill, forcing Morel to adapt and counter with everything she had learned through years of survival. His movements were fluid despite his size, each strike calculated yet powerful enough to kill if it connected fully. She was fast, strategic, unpredictable. Where he used strength, she used leverage. Where he pressed forward, she redirected. They moved together in a deadly dance that was part combat, part conversation, their bodies speaking a language of trust and challenge. Again, Zandrek commanded after she successfully avoided a strike that would have incapacitated most warriors. "Valdrin will not give you time to breathe. He will press every advantage. Show me how you handle sustained pressure." He attacked in a flurry of movement, each strike flowing into the next without pause. Morel's mind raced, calculating angles and weaknesses even as her body moved instinctively. Years of survival had honed her reflexes to something preternatural. She ducked under a high sweep, rolled away from a low strike, then used his momentum against him as he overextended, sending him stumbling forward. She did not press the advantage, instead returning to a ready stance, waiting. Zandrek straightened, breathing hard, something like pride warming his expression. "Good. You fight smart, not just strong." But Valdrin was brutal and experienced, with none of the honor that would make him fight fair. "Use his arrogance," Zandrek instructed, circling her like a predator. "He will expect you to be afraid, because you are young, because you are Omega, because he thinks he broke you years ago. Use that. Let him think he has the advantage, until the moment you take it away." He lunged again, and this time Morel let herself appear uncertain, taking a half step back as if losing confidence. Zandrek recognized the strategy immediately and pressed harder, forcing her into what looked like a defensive retreat. Then, when he was certain of his advantage, she moved. It was a technique she had learned from a wandering warrior years ago, one that required perfect timing and absolute trust in her own calculations. She dropped into a crouch at the exact moment his weight was committed forward, swept his legs with brutal efficiency, and as he fell, she moved with him, ending with her arm across his throat in a position that would be lethal in actual combat. They froze like that, both breathing hard, her body pressed against his hands instinctively gripping her arms but not pushing her away. "That," he said quietly, his voice rumbling beneath her arm, "is exactly what you need to do tomorrow." But neither moved for a long moment. The position was intimate, despite being born of combat, and they both felt it. Morel became acutely aware of the heat of his body, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her arm, the way his hands gentled on her arms from restraint to something closer to caress. She pulled back first, offering him a hand up. He took it, and when they stood facing each other again, something had shifted between them. They had crossed from reluctant allies into something deeper, something neither was quite ready to name, but both recognized. They moved together like a deadly dance, each strike met with a counter, each feint revealing a deeper strategy. And somewhere in the rhythm of combat, something else emerged. Trust. Partnership. The unspoken understanding that they were stronger together than either had been alone. Hours passed. Sweat soaked through their clothing. Muscles burned with exertion. But neither called for rest. This was about more than physical preparation. This was about Morel reclaiming parts of herself she had buried for survival. This was about Xandrek learning to trust again that someone he cared for could be strong enough to face danger and survive. When they finally paused, both breathing hard, Morel leaned against the stone wall, tilting her head back to let the cool air dry the sweat on her throat. Xandrek stood a few paces away, ostensibly catching his breath, but truthfully taking the opportunity to simply watch her. She was magnificent, not despite her scars and losses, but because of them. Every movement carried the weight of survival. Every choice she made in combat reflected years of desperate learning. She was not some pampered court Luna who had never known hardship. She was a warrior forged in loss and tempered by determination. And he was falling in love with her. The realization settled over him with surprising calm. He had not been looking for this, had not wanted it, truth be told. But here it was anyway, undeniable and terrifying and absolutely right. "What are you thinking?" Morel asked without opening her eyes, somehow sensing the intensity of his gaze. "That you are going to win tomorrow. That Valdrin has already lost because he has no idea who he is truly facing." She opened her eyes, turning to look at him fully. "And if I do not win? If he is faster or stronger or luckier than we anticipate?" Xandrek closed the distance between them until he stood directly in front of her, one hand coming up to rest against the wall beside her head, bracketing her without trapping her. "Then I will have watched someone I care for fight with honor and courage, and that will be worth remembering regardless of outcome. But you will win, Morel, because you have something he does not." "What is that?" "Something worth fighting for beyond power." "You are not fighting to take something. You are fighting to reclaim something stolen. You are fighting for justice, for your parents' memory, for every person whose life he destroyed. That gives you a strength he cannot match." He leaned down, his forehead resting gently against hers. "And you are not alone. Not anymore." Morel closed her eyes again, but this time tears leaked from beneath the lids. "I have been alone so long. I do not know how to be anything else. I do not know how to trust that this is real, that you are real, that I will not wake tomorrow and find it was all some desperate dream conjured by a freezing girl dying in the snow. Then let me prove it is real. Let me stand with you tomorrow. Let me show you that you never have to be alone again unless you choose to be." When they finally left the training chamber, dawn was approaching. They walked through the silent castle, neither speaking, but both acutely aware of the other's presence. At the door to Morel's chambers, Xandrek stopped. "Rest," he said quietly. "You need your strength." But when she moved to enter, he caught her hand, pulling her back gently. She turned, a question in her eyes, and he answered it by pulling her into an embrace that was both fierce and tender. "Whatever happens tomorrow, know this. You are not alone. Not anymore." Morel rested her forehead against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady. "Neither are you." In that moment, both felt something they thought lost forever. Hope. Dawn broke cold and merciless, the sky the color of steel. Snow had stopped falling, leaving the world crystalline and still. The challenge ground was prepared in the valley between the castle and Valdrin's camp. Representatives from both packs lined the perimeter, witnesses to what would either be justice or massacre. Mirelle stood in the center wearing light armor over her red hooded cloak, her white hair braided back from her face. She looked younger than her years, and Zandrek knew Valdrin would use that. Across from her, Valdrin removed his heavy furs, revealing arms covered in scars from a lifetime of violence. He smiled that dead smile. "Any last words, little girl?" Mirelle's voice rang clear across the frozen ground. "You killed my father when he trusted you. You murdered my mother when she begged for mercy. You burned my home and scattered my people. Today, you answer for all of it." Valdrin laughed. "Today, you die like they did. Forgotten." The signal was given. They clashed. Valdrin fought like a berserker, all rage and brutal strength. His claws raked across Mirelle's shoulder, drawing first blood. He pressed the advantage, driving her back toward the edge of the circle. The crowd murmured. It looked like a slaughter in slow motion. But Zandrek watched closely, and he saw what others missed. Mirelle was not retreating in panic. She was leading, drawing Valdrin exactly where she wanted him, letting him exhaust his initial fury while she calculated. Valdrin raised his arm for a killing blow. Mirelle moved. She dropped low, sweeping his legs with a precision strike that sent him crashing into the frozen ground. Before he could recover, she was on him, her knee driving into his chest, her blade at his throat. The entire valley went silent. Valdrin's eyes widened in shock and fury. Mirelle leaned close, her voice for him alone. "My parents died with your name as the last thing they heard. Let it be the last thing you hear too." She drove the blade home. Valdrin Kresh, betrayer and murderer, died as he had lived. Violently, but this time, justly. Mirelle stood slowly, blood on her hands but victory in her eyes. She turned to face the Blackthorn warriors, and her voice carried across the valley with undeniable authority. "By right of blood and challenge, I reclaim what was stolen. The Moonveil Pack is reborn. Any who swore loyalty to a traitor may leave now. Any who wish to follow true leadership may stay and be welcomed." More than half of Valdrin's warriors knelt immediately. They had followed strength because they knew nothing else. Now they followed honor because they finally saw it. Mirelle looked up at the hill where Zandrek stood with his own pack, and their eyes met across the distance. She saw pride there, admiration, and something deeper that made her heart stutter. Love. Not the desperate love of loneliness seeking to be filled, but the steady love of two people who had walked through fire and found each other on the other side. The celebration that night filled the castle with warmth it had not known in years. Mirelle moved through the great hall, accepting congratulations and oaths of fealty from warriors who now called her Alpha. She bore it all with grace, but Zandrek could see the exhaustion beneath. When she finally slipped away to the battlements, seeking air and solitude, he followed. She stood at the edge, looking out over the moonlit valley, where she had reclaimed her name and her purpose. Snow had begun to fall again, gentle this time, like the world itself was offering blessing. Zandrek stopped beside her, close enough to touch but giving her space. "You were magnificent today." Mirelle smiled slightly, though shadows lingered in her eyes. "I was angry. There is a difference. Perhaps, but you were also just, and merciful to those who deserved mercy. That is what makes a true leader." She turned to him, and in the moonlight she looked both ancient and impossibly young. "What happens now? I have my pack again, but they are scattered, homeless. You have your kingdom. We are leaders of different people, different lands. How does this work?" Zandrek reached for her hand, his thumb tracing across her knuckles. I have spent 3 years believing my heart was buried with Amira. I honored her memory by refusing to let anyone else in. I thought that was love. But I was wrong. He stepped closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face. True love is not refusing to feel again. It is honoring what we had by choosing to live fully. To love again, not as a replacement, but as a new chapter. Amira would want me to be happy. And you, Mirelle Trudna, make me happy. Tears spilled down Mirelle's cheeks. I am afraid. I have survived so long by trusting no one, by keeping everyone at distance. What if I do not know how to let someone in? What if I fail you? Xandric wiped her tears gently. Then we will learn together. I am not asking for perfection. I am asking for a chance to build something new, to unite our packs, our people, our lives, to stop surviving and start living. He pulled back slightly, his expression turning serious. I am asking you to be my Luna, not to replace what I lost, but to begin what we can build. I am asking you to stand beside me, not behind me, to challenge me when I am wrong and support me when I am right, to let me love you as fiercely as you deserve. Mirelle looked at this man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and never tried to diminish her strength, who had loved deeply before and was brave enough to love again, who commanded armies but spoke to her with tenderness. She thought of the girl who had hidden in the cellar while her world burned, the woman who had wandered alone through winter after winter, believing she would never belong anywhere again. And she realized something profound. Home was not a place. It was a person. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will stand beside you. I will love you with everything I am. I will build a future instead of mourning the past. Xandric kissed her then, deep and desperate, years of loneliness and loss melting away in the warmth they created together. The snow fell around them, but neither felt the cold. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and smiling. My fierce Luna, Xandric murmured against her hair. My gentle king, she replied. And in that moment, both knew they had found what they thought lost forever. Not just love, but partnership. Not just passion, but peace. The winter that had once seemed endless was finally thawing. The weeks that followed were not easy. Uniting two packs required delicate negotiation, compromise, and patience from both sides. There were those among Xandric's people who questioned accepting the remnants of the Moonveil pack. There were those among Mirelle's followers who feared losing their identity by joining a larger kingdom. But Xandric and Mirelle faced every challenge together, presenting a united front that gradually won over even the most skeptical. Mirelle proved herself not just as a warrior, but as a leader with vision. She suggested new trade routes, implemented training programs that blended the strengths of both packs, and listened to the concerns of the lowest Omega with the same attention she gave to the highest-ranking warriors. Xandric watched her with growing admiration, seeing her transform from a survivor hiding in plain sight to a Luna who commanded respect without demanding it. One evening, as they reviewed supply reports in the study, Corvain entered with news that made Xandric's expression darken. The northern borders are under pressure again. The Iron Peak pack is testing our defenses. Mirelle looked up from the maps spread across the table. They are wondering if the new alliance has made us weaker or stronger. They are waiting to see if we will fracture under pressure. Exactly, Corvain agreed, surprised at her quick understanding. Then we show them strength, Mirelle said simply. Not by attacking, but by holding firm. We reinforce the borders, but do not provoke. We demonstrate that unity has made us unshakable. Xandric nodded slowly, appreciating the strategy. And if they attack anyway? Mirelle's eyes glinted with something sharp. Then we remind them why it is foolish to test a Luna who has nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Corvain smiled grimly. I am beginning to understand why the king chose you." Morel returned the smile. "He did not choose me. We chose each other. There is a difference." When Corvain left, Xandrek pulled Morel close, burying his face in her hair. "You continue to surprise me." "Good," she murmured. "Life would be boring otherwise." He laughed, the sound rich and genuine, and Morel realized she had never heard him truly laugh before. She decided then that making him laugh would become one of her favorite pursuits. That night, as they lay together in the great bed that had once felt too empty, Morel traced the scars across Xandrek's chest, each one a story of battles survived. "Tell me about this one," she asked, touching a particularly jagged mark near his ribs. "A border skirmish 5 winters ago. I was arrogant, thought I could take 3 opponents at once. Nearly died for my pride. And this?" Her finger moved to a slash across his shoulder. "Training accident when I was young. Thought I was faster than I was. My father let me keep the scar as a lesson in humility." Morel continued her exploration, learning the map of his body through the history written on his skin. When she reached a mark over his heart, smaller and more precise than the others, he caught her hand. "That one was not from battle." "No? No. It was self-inflicted. The day Amara died, I took a blade and marked myself, a reminder that love leaves scars whether we want it to or not." Morel pressed her lips to the old scar, feeling his breath hitch. "All scars are proof we survived, that we lived through something that should have destroyed us. They are not weaknesses, they are victories." Xandrek cupped her face, his dark eyes intense. "When did you become so wise?" "When I stopped running from pain and started learning from it." He kissed her slowly, reverently, and she felt cherished in a way she had never experienced. Not as something fragile to be protected, but as something precious to be valued. Later, as she drifted toward sleep in his arms, Morel whispered against his chest, "I am happy. For the first time since I was a child, I am truly happy." Xandrek tightened his hold, his voice rough with emotion. "Then I will spend every day ensuring you stay that way." The challenge from the Iron Peak Pack came 3 weeks later, just as Morel had predicted. They sent a war party to test the northern defenses, expecting confusion and weakness from the newly merged packs. They found neither. Xandrek and Morel led the defense together, their forces moving with a coordination that spoke of hours of training and absolute trust in each other's command. Xandrek led the frontal assault with brutal efficiency, his warriors crashing into the enemy line like an avalanche of steel and fury. But it was Morel's strategy that won the day. While Xandrek held their attention, she led a smaller force through a hidden mountain pass, emerging behind the Iron Peak warriors and cutting off their retreat. Trapped between 2 forces, the enemy had no choice but to surrender. The Iron Peak Alpha, a grizzled veteran named Hrothgar, was brought before Xandrek and Morel. He expected execution or humiliation. Instead, Morel spoke with calm authority. "You tested us to see if we were weak. You have your answer. But we do not seek to expand through conquest. We seek stability, peace. Return to your lands and tell your people that the Galfrost Moonvale Alliance is not to be trifled with. But also tell them that we offer fair trade and mutual protection to those who approach in good faith." Hrothgar studied her with calculating eyes. "You are the Luna they speak of, the one who killed Valdrin Kresh." "I am." He nodded slowly, respect grudging but genuine. "Perhaps we judged too quickly. The old ways spoke of strength through domination. You speak of strength through unity. It is a strange concept." Xandrek stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Strange or not, it is the future. You may join it or oppose it, but you will not test it again without consequences far harsher than what you face today." Hrothgar knelt, a gesture that shocked his own warriors. I will take your message, and I will consider your offer." When the Iron Peak forces retreated, Xandrek's warriors celebrated victory with songs and feasting. But Xandrek pulled Morel aside, away from the noise and celebration. In the quiet of a secluded alcove overlooking the battlefield being cleared below, he took both her hands in his. "You saved lives today. Not just ours, but theirs. You could have ordered execution. Instead, you chose mercy that came from strength, not weakness. You chose wisdom over vengeance." His voice dropped lower, filled with emotion. "Amera was my heart's companion in a different time, a different version of myself. But you, Morel, you are my equal in every way that matters. You challenge me to be better. You make me want to build a future worth living, instead of merely surviving the present." He released one of her hands to reach into his coat, withdrawing a small object wrapped in cloth. "This was my mother's. She gave it to Amera when we were bonded, and Amera made me promise that if I ever found love again, I would pass it on to someone worthy." He unwrapped the cloth, revealing a ring of silver and moonstone, delicate but strong, its design ancient and beautiful. "I am asking you, Morel Trudna, Luna of the Moonveil Pack, warrior, strategist, and the woman who brought light back into my darkness, will you bind your life to mine? Will you rule beside me not just in name but in truth? Will you be my mate, my partner, my love, for whatever years we are granted?" Morel looked at the ring, then at Xandrek, and saw in his eyes the same vulnerability she felt in her own heart. The terrifying, beautiful vulnerability of choosing to love again after loss, of believing that joy could coexist with the memory of sorrow. She thought of the girl hiding in the cellar, certain she would die alone and forgotten. She thought of the woman who had wandered through winter after winter, believing warmth was something that happened to other people. And she thought of the Luna she had become, not despite her scars, but because of them. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Yes, to all of it. To partnership. To love. To building something beautiful out of the ashes of what we lost. Yes, Xandrek Galfrost. I will be yours, and you will be mine." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and when their lips met, it felt like a promise. Not of perfection, but of presence. Not of a life without pain, but of never facing pain alone again. The celebration of their bonding was held under the first full moon of spring, when the worst of winter had finally released its grip on the land. The snow had melted except for stubborn patches and deep shadows, revealing earth dark and rich with promise. Trees showed the first hints of green, tiny buds that would soon burst into leaves. The world itself seemed to be celebrating their union with the slow, patient unfurling of new life. Representatives from allied packs traveled from distant territories to witness the union of two leaders who had both survived impossible loss and chosen love anyway. Some came out of respect, some out of curiosity, some simply because refusing an invitation from the Alpha King would be politically unwise, but all left touched by what they witnessed. The ceremony took place in the castle courtyard, transformed by hundreds of candles and lanterns that turned the space into something magical. White flowers, the first blooms of the season painstakingly gathered from southern territories, were woven through every surface, their fragrance sweet and hopeful, covering the lingering scent of winter's harshness. Long ribbons of silver and white hung from every balcony, stirring gently in the evening breeze. The sound they made was like whispered blessings, a soft susurrus that underscored the more obvious sounds of the gathering crowd. Musicians played traditional bonding songs on instruments carved from ancient wood, melodies that had celebrated unions for countless generations. Torches ringed the courtyard, their flames dancing in the breeze, casting everything in warm golden light that made the moment feel suspended outside of time. The stones beneath their feet had been scrubbed clean and covered with petals, creating a path that led to the center where the ceremony would take place. Morel wore a gown of white and silver that had taken a team of seamstresses 3 weeks to create. The fabric was silk so fine it moved like water, catching the candlelight with each breath she took. Silver thread formed patterns across the bodice, depicting the phases of the moon in intricate detail. The sleeves were long and flowing, reminiscent of the cloak she had worn that first day. But these were lined with fur as white as her hair, soft and luxurious. Her white hair had been left loose as was tradition for bonding ceremonies, crowned with a circlet of winter roses, their white petals touched with the faintest blush of pink at the edges. The flowers had been preserved specially for this occasion, a gift from the Southern Territories. She looked like the personification of the moon itself, beautiful and fierce and untouchable, except by the one she chose to let close. Several guests were heard to whisper that they had never seen a Luna so perfectly named. Xandrek wore the ceremonial armor of his ancestors, black steel chased with silver in patterns that matched the phases of the moon on her dress. The armor had been worn by generations of Alpha Kings before him, each adding their own mark to it, creating a historical record in metal and craftsmanship. His long dark hair had been braided back from his face in the warrior style, each braid interwoven with silver thread that caught the light when he moved. His beard was trimmed close, revealing the strong line of his jaw. Around his neck hung the Alpha's medallion, a heavy piece of ancient silver bearing the sigil of his house. He looked every inch the warrior king, formidable and unyielding, someone who could command armies and bend kingdoms to his will, until Morel walked toward him down the aisle formed by their combined packs, and his expression softened into something tender and awed, revealing the man beneath the monarch. The crowd fell silent as she approached, her steps measured and dignified, carrying herself with the bearing of the Luna she had always been meant to be. Alara, the young servant Morel had protected, walked before her, scattering more petals. The girl glowed with pride at being chosen for such an honor. When Morel reached Xandrek, he took her hands, and even those in the back of the courtyard could see the way his entire body relaxed, as if her touch alone brought him peace. The priestess, ancient and wise with silver hair that fell to her waist, began the ancient words of bonding. Her voice carried across the silent courtyard with surprising strength for someone so elderly. She spoke of the moon and the mountain, of strength and wisdom, of two halves becoming whole without losing their individual completeness. But when it came time for them to speak their own vows, Xandrek surprised everyone by departing from tradition. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some frowned at the break from protocol. Others leaned forward with interest. "Mirel Trudna," he said, his deep voice carrying across the silent courtyard with the authority of a man who had commanded thousands, but the tenderness of a man speaking to his beloved. "I vow to see you always as you truly are, not as the world expects you to be. I vow to stand beside you in victory and defeat, in joy and sorrow, in certainty and doubt. I vow to love you not despite your scars, but with gratitude for the strength they represent, for they made you who you are, and who you are is extraordinary." His grip on her hands tightened, emotion making his voice rougher. "I vow to build with you a future that honors both our pasts without being imprisoned by them. I vow to make you laugh as often as I can, because your smile is the greatest treasure I have ever earned. I vow to protect you fiercely, but never diminish you. I vow to trust your strength even when it terrifies me, and I vow to love you with everything I am, for all the days I am granted." Morel's tears fell freely, but she smiled through them, and when she spoke, her voice rang clear and strong across the courtyard. "Xandrek Galfrost," she replied, her voice strong and clear. "I vow to challenge you when you need challenging and support you when you need supporting, and to have the wisdom to know which is which. I vow to trust you with my vulnerabilities, even when fear tells me to hide them. I vow to love you with the same fierceness you show the world, and the same tenderness you show me. I vow to honor the love you gave before me, knowing it shaped the man who stands before me now. And I vow to choose you, every day, for as many days as we are given." The priestess completed the ceremony, and when Zandrek kissed his Luna, the courtyard erupted in celebration. But for the two at the center of it all, the world narrowed to just each other. Two people who had walked through darkness and found light. Two leaders who had discovered that the strongest kingdoms are built not on domination, but on love. That night, after the feasting and dancing, after the last well-wishers had finally departed, Zandrek carried Morel to their chambers. Not because she could not walk, but because he wanted to. Because holding her close had become his favorite way to move through the world. He set her down gently beside the windows overlooking the valley, and they stood together in the moonlight, her back against his chest, his arms wrapped around her waist. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. "Beyond words," she admitted. "Which is strange, considering I spent so many years certain happiness was not meant for me." I felt the same. After Amera died, I thought joy was a luxury I no longer deserved, that moving on would be a betrayal of what we had. And now? Now I understand that she loved me enough to want me to live fully, that carrying grief does not mean rejecting joy, that I can honor her memory and build a future with you without either being diminished. He turned her in his arms, his expression serious. "Thank you for teaching me that. Thank you for being patient while I learned to open my heart again. Thank you for being exactly who you are." Morel reached up, her fingers tracing the strong lines of his face. "Thank you for seeing me when I had forgotten how to be seen. Thank you for being gentle with my fears and fierce in your devotion. Thank you for showing me that home is not a place to return to, but a person to return to." They made love that night with a tenderness that spoke of deep connection, of two souls recognizing their match. And later, as they lay tangled together in the quiet darkness, both felt peace settle over them like a blessing. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were border disputes to navigate, harsh winters to endure, political alliances to forge and maintain. There were disagreements between them, moments of frustration when their different leadership styles clashed. But they faced everything together, and each challenge overcome strengthened the bond between them. Morel proved to be a Luna, whose legend grew with each passing season. She was known for her strategic brilliance, her fair judgment, and her willingness to listen to the smallest voice in the room if that voice spoke truth. Warriors respected her skill. Omegas felt safe under her protection. Alphas from distant packs sought her counsel, but those who knew her best saw something more. They saw the way she smiled when Zandrek entered a room, the way she touched his arm gently when he grew too harsh in council meetings, grounding him, the way she watched him with their children, her expression soft with love. Yes, children. 3 years after their bonding, Morel gave birth to twin boys with their father's dark hair and their mother's green eyes. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, white-haired and fierce from the moment she drew breath. Zandrek proved to be a devoted father, as gentle with his children as he was fierce in battle. Morel watched him teach their sons to fight with honor, and their daughter to trust her own strength, and fell in love with him all over again. One evening, when the children were finally asleep after much protest and negotiation, Zandrek found Morel on the battlements where they had first acknowledged their love. She stood in the same spot, looking out over the same valley, but everything had changed. The valley was green now with spring growth. The castle below thrummed with life and laughter. And Morel herself was no longer the wounded warrior hiding behind a servant's mask. She stood tall and certain, a Luna in truth, surrounded by love instead of loss. Zandrek wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned into his warmth with a contentment that still sometimes surprised her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "5 warriors who thought I was an easy mark," she said with a smile. "How 13 seconds changed the course of my entire life." "Changed both our lives," he corrected gently. She turned in his arms, her expression serious despite the smile. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing me? taking on the complications of my past, the challenges of uniting our packs. Zandrek cupped her face, his dark eyes blazing with certainty. Never. Not for one moment. You are the best decision I have ever made. You and our children are my greatest treasures. This life we have built together is more than I ever dared hope for after Amira died. He kissed her forehead tenderly. You taught me that the heart has endless capacity for love, if we are brave enough to let it expand. That honoring the past does not mean being imprisoned by it. That new chapters can be written without erasing what came before. Morel kissed him deeply, pouring years of gratitude and love into the connection. When they finally pulled apart, she whispered against his lips, "Then let us write many more chapters together. Let us fill them with laughter and challenges and love. Let us build a legacy not of conquest, but of partnership. Let us show our children that strength comes in many forms, and the greatest strength of all is choosing to love despite knowing it comes with the risk of loss." Zandrek smiled, that rare, genuine smile reserved only for her. "Agreed. Though I should warn you, our daughter is already showing signs of your stubborn independence. We are going to have our hands full when she comes of age." Morel laughed, the sound like bells in the darkness. "Good. The world needs more women who refuse to be underestimated." They stood together under the stars, two leaders who had found each other in the most unexpected way. Two wounded hearts that had healed not by forgetting pain, but by choosing joy anyway. Two people who proved that the strongest bonds are forged not in perfection, but in the willingness to be vulnerable with another. In the valley below, their people lived in peace, built on the foundation of their leader's example. Trade flourished. Children grew up learning both combat and compassion. And the story was told and retold of the Luna, who had been mistaken for a servant, and the king who had been wise enough to see her true value. Years later, when Morel and Zandrek were old and silver-haired, sitting together watching their grandchildren play in the same courtyard where they had first sparred, he would take her hand and say what he had said 1,000 times before. "Best 13 seconds of my life." And she would squeeze his hand and reply as she always did. "Mine too," because in those 13 seconds, when 5 warriors learned the cost of underestimating an Omega who was truly a Luna, 2 lonely souls found their way to each other, and in finding each other, they found home. The end of their story was not marked by tragedy, but by contentment. Not by dramatic final battles, but by the quiet satisfaction of lives well lived. They grew old together, surrounded by children and grandchildren who carried forward their legacy of strength, tempered with compassion. When Zandrek's time finally came, decades after that snowy day when he first saw her fight, he died peacefully in his sleep with Morel's hand in his. She mourned deeply, but without regret, knowing they had been given more years together than many are blessed with. She lived 3 more years after his death, leading their people with the same wisdom and strength she always had. And when her own time came, she passed surrounded by family who loved her, in the castle that had become her true home. They were buried side by side on the hill overlooking the valley where they had first met, where 5 foolish warriors had made the mistake that changed everything. A monument was erected bearing words Morel herself had chosen. Here lie Zandrek Galfrost and Morel Trudna, King and Luna, partners, mates. Proof that love can bloom even in the deepest winter, and that the heart brave enough to risk loss again will be rewarded with treasures beyond measure. And on winter nights, when snow falls heavy and the wind howls through the valley, travelers swear they can see 2 figures standing on that hill, a dark-haired king and a white-haired Luna, standing side by side, watching over the land they built together. Legends fade, but love endures, and in the end, that is the only story that truly matters. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.